Hello, welcome back. Today it's all about design work, and of course we've been designing classes rather than ancestries or species or races or anything like that. So we're doing the really hard stuff. Classes is one of the harder things to design, although I would say adventures are probably the more complicated, they're more involved, and can be also very difficult as well. But classes, a lot of play testing is well required. I'm going to put up a poll. Feel free to take part in that poll. And I suggest grabbing some food, some drink, making sure you are comfortable, and we'll get into this, cover this. We have, I would say, roughly about, I don't know, just under 2 hours to get the job done. I'm hoping we can get it done sooner, but you never know with these things. I have done some homework. I will be sharing it with you. So yeah, let's make a class, shall we? Anyway, let's go. Hi, welcome to How to D&D. My name is Fred Wheeler, and today I want to talk about Dungeons and Dragons, specifically Shadowdark RPG, which is just another version of Dungeons and Dragons. And we're going to make a class. We're going to make the Monster Slayer class, which the Monster Hunter and the Monster Slayer, there are subclasses that have been used in 5e, and they've kind of been around a while. The concept is not new. So we're just taking that concept and we're building it for Shadowdark, essentially. And what I thought we would do, since that's the sort of focus, is I would give you sort of a quick rundown of what I have, then look at chat, see what you have to say, and then hopefully we'll finalize it all. So usually the first question I have is this question. That is, how would you build it yourself? How would you build the Shadowdark RPG Monster Slayer class? Okay. How would you build the Shadowdark RPG Monster Slayer class? Okay. There's something now, I've got a Google document that I've started. The first thing I'm going to say is, do we actually need it? It's one of the questions in the poll that I've put forward. Do we actually need something like this? And I would agree that we probably don't need something like this. But why am I doing it? Because quite often when it comes to class design, people go back to, but I want something that is a Monster Slayer, that has things built around that. And sometimes that's difficult to do with just the core classes, like your fighter, your wizard, your priest, and your thief, or the 12 classes of Dungeons and Dragons, modern Dungeons and Dragons, or 13 if you count Artificer. Sometimes it can be difficult to do that. So how can we do this? If we can do it with anything, it'll be with Shadowdark, because it's much easier to make a class for Shadowdark than it is for anything else. Hello, Paladin. How are you doing? And hello, Fred Huber, who's a patron and a moderator. Thanks for being here. And Fred is quite right that any PC, all PCs are essentially Monster Slayers to a certain degree, even if their abilities may not feel like they've been built around that. So why am I doing it? Well, one of the reasons is everybody does it. One, sometimes it's hard for the core class to fit into this. But another major reason, actually probably the primary reason, is because my players asked for it. One of my players asked for it. I think maybe one or two asked for a Monster Slayer class. Okay? And to give you an idea, this may wind up leading down the same sort of route as the Swashbuckler last week. Last week we did the class, the Swashbuckler, and you know that I had some problems trying to put that together so that it felt like it was different to the Thief in Shadowdark. The Thief and the Swashbuckler are very, very similar in nature. And I actually had some arguments with my home group about that class, which resulted in me making significant adjustments and changes to it, which I don't know are necessarily going to work. But this is the route that we take. When we start making classes, you will soon discover, once you start down this path, whether it was a good idea or not. Sometimes it's not a good idea. We will find out today if this is a good idea. Okay? So put in your ideas. I'm going to show you what I have and explain a lot of the stuff that I've done. and then we're going to go back to chat and see what you have to say. So I would say this is draft 7. I think that means we have this, after today we'll have 7 classes. It is the 18th today in New Zealand of September. We are working on the, where's the Monster Slayer? I can't find it. Did I put it in here? Monster. Oh no, I've got other things here, but I don't see Monster Slayer. I know, oh, okay, just put Monster Slayer. Okay, so that's what we're working on. Yes, a few of you have probably noticed the word Beastmaster is there as well. God help me when that comes around. But I feel like I'm close to understanding how to do that. Okay, so this is what I have so far. I've decided to call it the Monster Slayer or Monster Hunter, and I believe that these have really kind of already been built before. So what is essentially this type of class? It's a seeker of vampires, dragons, fiends, fae, evil monster, and evil monsters of the dark. And I guess we could add in another line that, because it's all about seeking them out, but also slaying them, right? You kill evil creatures, evil monsters, evil creatures that threaten the world. Something like that. Okay, so I put in some weapons. This is, I think what I did is I just looked at it and I thought in terms of if I was going to make a Monster Slayer, how would this work? And I started with Xanathar's Guide to Everything because the Monster Slayer's in here. And so I was looking at that, and then I was thinking in terms of the different sort of archetypes. And you could say, well, look, a Monster Slayer could have potentially used any weapon. And I wouldn't say that that's wrong. But I have been very specific. I put down bastard sword, club, crossbow, dagger, longbow, longsword, mace, short bow, short sword, spear, and staff. Now, you'll notice that I've left out all of the two-handed weapons. And I guess my rationale for that is I would have figured that with a Monster Slayer, it would be smarter. You're either using a long-range two-handed weapon like your longbow and your short bow, right? I think even your crossbow, you require two hands, correct, to fire. Like it's not something that you can just fire with one hand. It's not a one-handed crossbow. It's two-handed. Okay, and if you weren't doing that, then you would have a shield to protect yourself along with wearing whatever armor you've got, and you have a weapon in your hands to do whatever damage you need to do. So that's kind of how I built it. But you could build this and just say, yeah, you get all weapons, which is almost identical to what you would get if you were looking at the core classes in Shadowdark and you were building a fighter. But I wanted it to be different to the fighter in some way, so that's why I've specified. And also, too, something like the priest has got a smaller list compared. The fighter's the only one that gets every single weapon, and quite often I think that's probably a good thing. But again, you could just say all weapons. I've put down armor. I put down leather armor and chainmail, but I haven't put down plate mail. One, because I didn't want them to have their armor to be quite as good as the fighter. I didn't think that was necessary. And so I've put that as our number. Again, I'm assuming that this is a character that is going to need to be very mobile. And if you're dealing with monsters of the dark, you probably don't want to, if you can help it, you probably don't want to be wearing chainmail because you get disadvantage on stealth, right? And you definitely get disadvantage on swimming and stealth when it comes to plate armor as well. And so this chainmail here is like, really? Should that be there? Because really stealth with monsters like vampires, you need to sneak up on them, on dragons. Otherwise, they will kill you. Fiends, demons and devils. You've got to sneak up on them. A lot of these evil creatures are ambush monsters, so you need to be able to do that really well. So this is probably the one questionable thing to include because you would get disadvantage. It's kind of a trap, if you ask me. Okay, now, the next thing I did was I looked at hit points. How many hit points did it need to have? And I decided that it didn't need to have as many. Believe it or not, the number of hit points you have in Shadowdark is not quite as essential as it might be in something like 5e, particularly at low level. 5e after about level 4 or 5, it doesn't really matter if you've got, what your hit points are, because you just, the system's built so you pretty much can't die, and if you do die, you can bring your character back. Shadowdark, your character doesn't instantly die. There's no instant death mechanics usually in Shadowdark. So you don't have that like in 5e. So hit points, actually, I could put a D2 and it probably wouldn't matter in the slightest. Because you have at least one round to get them up before they do die. That's just how the mechanics work, unless you use a mod, right? So I decided, let's go in terms of the priest, because the priest has got a D6, and this is not really a full-blown fighter, because they're going to be getting magic as well. We're going to give, this is a combination of fighter and magic. So it's a Gish. We're building a Gish class, right? So if we're building a Gish class, we need to think about that. So that's one of the reasons why I've put down a D6 for per level in terms of hit points. Okay, now we need to sort of focus on what are some of the fundamental things that they can do that are utility, that allow them to do what they are supposed to do well. And monster sense was the thing that I wanted to put down. So you know if and what immunities a monster has with a chaotic alignment in near range. So as long as you're within about near range, which is up to about 30 feet, and they have a chaotic alignment, which means basically they're evil, you would know what you would know if they have immunities and what their immunities are. Okay, and that's only a small aspect of a monster. It doesn't tell you all of their special abilities. I haven't said all their special abilities. I've just said what immunities a monster has. Now you might say, well, that's not very much. But if you look at Shadowdark and how the monster stat blocks are built, a lot of monsters have things that are like that. Usually it's called an immunity or it's impervious, right? So if I'm going through the core monsters for Shadowdark right now and just looking for things that are related to that might fit into that category. Let's keep going. Deathbolt, It's usually near the top. Impervious. The Azer is impervious. They have fire immunity. So this is an immunity. You would know that they were immune to fire. The Badger, immune to morale checks. So you would know that Badgers aren't going to give up. Then if you're going through and we get to something like, here's another one. To give you here we go. The Black Pudding. Impervious, only damaged by fire. So we know that, only damaged by fire. You have to use fire. Everything else is not going to work. It's impervious. And then this is what I wanted to do. Is like, it made sense to me that the monster slayer or monster hunter would know what they needed to do against certain monsters because they've trained and trained in terms of, they've built up their knowledge base, so they know what not to do, not what to do necessarily, but what not to do. It doesn't mean that they know all the special abilities of a monster, but they know what these things are immune to. That is not always going to come up, but when it does, it will be useful, right? So that's why I built it that way. Could this be a better feature? Absolutely. But is it necessary? I don't think we'll know until playtesting, honestly. Okay, next. Supernatural defense. I was looking at how 5e had built the Monster Slayer, and I decided that there's probably some things around being a Monster Slayer that you have had to build up your body's physical defenses and your mind to deal with their supernatural attacks. And so I thought, well, let's give them advantage on checks that affect their mind and body. And that pretty much, to a large extent, affects everything. Like, that means that pretty much every stat check that you make with a monster is probably going to wind up meaning that you get advantage. That is a very strong feature. It is also a very much a combat feature. Like, it really is a combat feature. And it can be applied to so many different things. Whether they're trying to affect your mind or whether they're trying to affect your body. It might be that adding in the body aspect but just keeping the mind is possibly the better way to go, rather than including the body as well. So I've made it very, very broad, and the reason why I've made it really, really broad is because otherwise, since I've taken away a little bit of armor options, a little bit of weapon options, I've taken their hit points down, they need to have something else as a defensive mechanism. And this is what the supernatural defense is all about, okay? And it kind of fits thematically with the narrative of the concept. That's why I put it there. I'm highlighting in yellow just because these are things that I think could be changed, but they may not be. Okay, this is a first draft as far as I'm concerned. Okay, spell casting. So you get to cast some spells as a monster slayer. Believe it or not, you get some spells. You don't get a lot, but you do get some. So I had a look at the spells that Xanathar's Guide to Everything had, and what I thought I could translate over quite easily, and then I looked at the comparisons in Shadowdark to see what would match with the spells that I used in 5e that would match up with the Shadowdark spells. And these are the ones that I came across. And so this is how I would suggest doing it, but I'll explain how I've built it. It's based basically off the priest's spell casting. So you refer to your Monster Slayer spell table to determine what spells you know. And you do not know a lot of spells. So you go down to that table, which I'll show you in a second. To cast a Monster Slayer spell you know, make a spell casting check by rolling 1d20 plus your wisdom modifier. Okay, and if you know anything about how the spell casting system in Shadowdark works, you know that you need to get equal to or greater than your spell casting check. So the DCs are already listed in the table that I've got. They are based off what wizards and priests are having to do in terms of the level, or the tier of that spell, not the level, the tier of that spell. Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3, Tier 4, Tier 5. And yes, we do go up as high as Tier 5. So I've done that. So then I looked at the Monster Slayer talent table. And usually I don't change too much. I usually have one that's choose whatever talent you like. So that's the 12. And then if you get 2, rolling 2 6-sided dice, then you get to distribute 2 points to your stats, however you like. You've got plenty of freedom there. So those are probably the better options to have available to you, although 12 is the ultimate one, right? Then I have included the fact that you're a spellcaster, but you're also involved in melee. I thought those were the things that we would lean into. So one is +1 to spellcasting checks, and another one is +1 to melee and ranged attack rolls, because I don't know whether you're going to focus on melee or ranged attacks. So I want it to be able to go either way, so it's going to be properly functional. Or you're going to go +1 into melee and ranged damage rolls. So you get to, and it's easy to apply, so you don't have to worry about, like with the fighter, you get +1 to attack and damage on a particular weapon, and I didn't want to duplicate what the fighter was doing. Does this feature make the Monster Slayer better in some way compared to the fighter class? Like, that's a good question. Like, is that actually making them even better? And my general feeling is no, it's not, because essentially it's the same sort of dice, it's the same mechanic. I think that he has here +1 to melee and ranged attacks. And I know, so some people read that and they think, okay, that means I get +1 to melee ranged attack rolls and the damage roll. It's not really how I would read it, but I know some people might interpret it that way. I have separated it so that it's very obvious, so it's nice and clear. So one of the reasons why I've written it this way is because of the fighter talent that has that wording. I can see there being potentially little rules lawyers that develop and grow within the community of Shadowdark that cause hassles, which are right now my players and my home group. Anyway, going down, we're going to go into what spells would you have access to as a Monster Slayer. So I looked, as I said, at Xanathar's Guide to Everything, and I selected the things that I thought would be the most fitting. And so I decided at level 1 to 10, you get access to protection from evil. There is a protection from evil spell in Shadowdark. It's a DC 11 to cast it because it's a tier 1 spell. So I felt like that's probably a good one to pick. It fits with kind of what you're dealing with. You know, your ability to protect yourself in some way from evil things. And so protection from evil seemed like a no-brainer for something like the Monster Slayer. And that's the reason why I've selected that one and put it in. You may feel differently about that, but I felt like it was the sensible one. Now, usually priests and wizards can cast the spell, but your Monster Slayer can do it. So for the spell's duration, chaotic beings have disadvantage on attack rolls and hostile spellcasting checks against the target. These beings also can't possess, compel, or beguile it. So in other words, you've got an extra layer of protection, which of course will go nicely with that supernatural defense ability that you've got, right? When cast on an already possessed target, the possessing entity makes a charisma check versus the last spellcasting check. So you can use it on somebody who's close. So it doesn't have to be on you; it could be on somebody else. So I think it's got a sensible use for the Monster Slayer. It makes sense. Then there's Zone of Truth. So at level 3, from level 3, you can get access to this one. Okay, and Zone of Truth, it's a DC 12, and Zone of Truth is really just to ensure that nobody can trick you. You are compelled, anything within near range is compelled to compel a creature you can see to speak truth, and it can't utter a deliberate lie while within range. So it's nice and simple, and I thought that was probably another thing. So if you're dealing with something that you can't really figure out what's going on and you need to get information out of them, well, now your Monster Slayer can get the truth out of something that's like that. Okay, a Zone of Truth. Then at level 5, so it's from 5 to 10, but level 5, Magic Circle's a really strong spell in Shadowdark. It's a DC 13. I've seen it used. It is probably the only thing that saved the party from vampires in the past. So Magic Circle seemed like a no-brainer to include, because without it, it's very difficult to survive the likes of vampires in Shadowdark. Shadowdark vampires aren't like 5e vampires. Shadowdark vampires will fuck you over so bad. And if you decide to include 2 and not 1, holy Toledo. Yeah, it's bad news. Bad news bears. Okay, next. At level 7 or to 10, from 7 to 10, you get Flame Strike. Now, the reason I've selected Flame Strike is because a lot of creatures and monsters are destroyed by fire. There are some, of course, that aren't. And Flame Strike is just, I guess it was there. It's probably the weaker of the spell options because it is fire, but it's a holy pillar of fire. So, I mean, how you adjudicate that is up to you. I've included it because I thought it made sense, and it was based off the 5e Monster Slayer. And then at level 9 to 10, you get Hold Monster, because, of course, you're a Monster Slayer, so you should be able to hold monsters. It's a DC 15. It's going to be a hard check, and because you're probably not going to stack up your wisdom, because you might well find that you're piling all your points if you are able to, increase your stats in any way. You're probably going to be increasing your strength, your dexterity, and your con. You're not necessarily increasing your wisdom. So that check is actually going to be quite difficult even when you reach level 9. Okay? So that's why I've done that. And then we're on to titles, which is the hardest and most difficult aspect of a Shadowdark class, is coming up with 15 different titles that are different that you can include. And so what I've done here is I've got a couple that I thought of. So we've got Slayer and we've got Hunter already, and I think we can make a title that's like that. But before that, I think we're going to call it Seeker. It came to me while I was in bed. I'm going to say it that way. Okay, Hunter. Let's go with Hunter next. Slayer. We might have to move these around. And then, of course, it's time to start doing the thesaurus thing, which I often do, just use a thesaurus to determine how to get the rest of the names that I need. So Slayer, thesaurus, I've done this kind of already. And I was looking through this and I was trying to decide on which one I kind of liked. That might fit into some of the various categories. I decided that Butcher was a nice one for chaotic. So the Butcher. And Executioner, Slaughterer, I feel are all sort of very chaotic. So I don't know necessarily whether we want to have them exactly, but let's go with... Predator. Is that it? Predator? I put down Predator because I was thinking if the Predator is, if you know the franchise Predator, basically it hunts alien monsters. It is kind of the pinnacle, but they aren't really good or lawful. They're not really neutral. They are very kind of evil in the way they operate. And so I'm putting in Predator, sort of being the pinnacle of that aspect of it. And then I think maybe we'll go with Executioner or Slaughterer. Because if I remember looking through here, yeah, Executioner, we've got Enforcer. I don't think I like the word Enforcer as a title, but Executioner sounds cool. Manslayer, don't like that. Killer, I don't think that's very good. Perpetrator, but Slaughterer and an Executioner seemed like they were pretty good options, so we're going to take those concepts. Assassin, I don't think we need that one, but Executioner, and then Slaughterer, Slaughterfest, Slaughterer, and so we're filling it out. We're getting closer and closer, but we're not there yet. And so I think the next word that I want to look at and see if we can't pull something out of it is not Slayer, but the word Hunter. I feel like Hunter might actually present us with some really good options, because that's what I feel this is more than anything else. So Hunter. So Deerstalker. Now here's the thing. I don't know about Deerstalker, but when I think about Stalker, I like that as a name, and I don't feel like that has a negative connotation to it really. So I don't feel like it's chaotic or necessarily neutral. But Stalker. And we might need to move that around. So maybe if we put, Slayer's probably, let's go cut. Slayer's probably the top end of lawful, right? And then Hunter, Stalker. Go here, Stalker, paste. And then what else do we have here? We've got Huntsman. I don't like that. Pursuer, boring. Huntress, no. Hunter, Huntress. Hunter. Huntress. Could be either one. Okay, Falconer. I don't think so. Ferreter feels like it's, yeah. Trapper. I don't want to necessarily go into trapping because Chaser, Deerstalker, a lot of these sort of, they're a bit too on the nose. I don't know what Nimrod feels like an idiot. Predator, Venator, yes, another name for Hunter. Huntsman, Predator, Pursuer, Chaser, Stalker, Orion. Let's Nimrod. I'm not sure what that really means. Nimrod. Define. Meaning. What is Nimrod? Nimrod, a skilled hunter. Well, Nimrod might be a name we can use. Let's transfer Nimrod in. Nimrod. Okay. let's put that in there. And then if we are looking at our names again, it's got here Stalker, we've already used that. Predator, we've already used that. And then we've got here Orion. I don't know what that is necessarily. How does that work? We've got Seeker already. Coverter, Chaser, Pursuer, Quester, Searcher, Explorer, Traveler. Yeah, I don't know that I like any of those. But let's take up Orion. I don't know why the word Orion has come in as the definition, but what's an Orion? Okay, Orion can refer to a powerful mythological hunter. Ah, I see. I'm starting to understand. A predominant constellation of stars or the name of a man with its meaning debated, but often linked to heaven's light, mountain, or boundary. The name's origin is Greek, but the constellation also recognized by other ancient cultures who associate it with deities and mythological features. Okay, Orion in mythology. The mighty hunter. In Greek mythology, Orion was a great, boastful hunter, often depicted as the son of sea god Poseidon. Now, boastful? Okay. Pursuit of death. A common story is that he pursued Pleiades, a group of stars, and he was killed by a goddess, Artemis. Okay, Scorpion, placed Orion among the stars, the constellation. So, we could use Orion as the top end of neutral. Why not that? Orion. And then I think we kind of come to the end of our hunter sort of options. I don't think that we've got much else that we can do with that. I think that's about the extent of it. Let's have a look at what we've got here so far. Is there a name? Slayer, Nimrod, Stalker. I think we could do a thesaurus search on Stalker. Okay, and Stalker is going to get us pretty much the same stuff. So it's not really sneaker. A lurker, skulker, weasel, skunk, spy, snooper, snake. Yeah, I don't know that I. Which is a bit. What is a better word for stalker? Interloper, intruder, trespasser, prowler, sneaker. Yeah, none of those sort of appeal to me at all. I don't really feel like there are going to be titles people are going to enjoy or like or even agree with. Peeping Tom, prowler, lurker. Yeah, sleuth. Sleuth is not a bad idea, but it kind of suggests something else, doesn't it? Tracker. We could use tracker. Tracker is something we could put here as tracker. It's kind of like the Seeker, but tracker. So that's not too bad. And I'm kind of a little bit stuck. So I think what we'll do is go to chat and see what you guys have had to say about this class. So I've been talking for about half an hour. And see what ideas you have floating around. It's interesting watching the poll today. It's going to be one of those things. I can see it's going to be very interesting. So, hello, Fred. How are you doing? Fred, is it Fred Gnomes? Without an N. Hello, Fred. How are you? I'm glad you're here. Right, Fred Huber, what have you got here? Maybe it's just another trophy hunter who wants the head of one of each creature. Yes, it could well be. Like that. Very much so. Absolutely. I don't like handing the PCs knowledge of creature abilities, strengths, or weaknesses. Fred Huber, I know exactly how you feel about that. It is why when I built that ability and I was thinking, how can I give them something that will make it easier for them to deal with certain types of monsters? And so in the end, what I decided to do is I decided it would only be their immunities. It would not be their special abilities. Do you know what I mean? So I that's what I focused on. I don't know. I had thought about giving them advantage on knowledge checks related to monsters. Now, it could be that I could rewrite it as a knowledge check. When the problem is that a lot of players don't necessarily ask to make any kind of dice roll to know about a monster, and it's not necessarily going to be useful to you. I guess I'd have to write it in such a way so that common knowledge you wouldn't have to roll for, which is the normal way in Shadowdark. Like, you don't have to roll for everything, and then advantage if you have to make a dice roll to know about a particular type of monster. Now, we could do that, and I think that would be potentially a reasonable thing to do, but I also know that dungeon masters then get confused about what information they should be giving out. And the last thing I want them to do is, if a player, asks for basic information, there's no dice roll, and the dungeon master decides, looking at the Shadowdark stat block, okay, what information should I give out to them? It really, the class feature doesn't really tell me, so I have to make that decision myself, which I'm fine with if the dungeon masters feel that way. But it's not super clear how you'd make that work. But because not every single monster has an immunity, I thought, well, actually, let's just say that instead of giving you a DC, I can tie in a DC or a dice roll that you would make, but I think actually it'd be better just to say, like, there are certain monsters, you know what their immunities are, so that you can get past those immunities, rather than trying to do trial and error, which is the normal process. You, out of all the other classes, can do this. And that's why I built it that way. But I totally understand your dislike for the PCs getting knowledge about creatures' abilities, strengths, and weaknesses. And we're essentially giving them the primary strength, so they know what their primary strength is, right? So, but the only reason why I haven't done it that way is because it creates a problem for a game master or dungeon master, unless they are very experienced, as to, well, what information, if they succeed on the dice roll that has been provided for me, or whatever dice roll I decide on, what do I give them information on? And so I didn't want to create problems for the dungeon master. I wanted to make it easy to adjudicate as a dungeon master, and easy for the players to understand how that feature would work, which is why I built it the way it is. Okay? Again, we could even tie a DC that you have to make, a difficulty check that you have to make, to determine what the immunities of a particular monster is. So there's going to be a little bit of a random factor in there. You won't always know. That could be done, for sure. Okay, going through here, Bone Collector. Well, it might be, maybe it's something, you've got Headhunter, Adjudicator, Skinner. I think Skinner's not a bad name. Do you know why I think Skinner's not a bad name? Is because hunters often skinned their things. It is not a, I don't know, what do you call it? So Skinner. So I'll put in Skinner, because I like that. Tracker, Skinner. And then you've got here Bone Collector. I almost feel like the Bone Collector is probably neutral. I guess, I don't know. This, Adjudicator, Execution. It's a difficult one. I think I'm going to have to do a little bit more research on this. So let me know if you think that, because as I said, the monster sense feature could have a DC tied to it. We could have them make a check to determine if they know the immunities of that monster. It doesn't necessarily need to be absolutely automatic. It's just how I tend to like to do things, which is to make things automatic, so that there isn't too many dice rolls involved. They're already rolling dice to make attacks and do damage. I don't want them making too many dice rolls on their turn and slowing everything down. And that's the key reason for doing that sort of thing. Do you know what I wonder if I can write this up. If I think about it, I could probably write it up so that there is a different way of structuring it with a dice roll, so that you have to make that dice roll to determine whether you know that information about its immunities. And I probably can use it based on something that I've already done before, because I've done a few of them. So I often try not to do that, though, don't I? Yeah, feedback in chat is going to be necessary to determine whether I decide to put in a DC check of some kind to determine whether you know the immunities of a particular monster that you come across that's got a chaotic alignment. So you won't know the alignment if the alignment of a monster is not chaotic and it's neutral or it's lawful. You won't know what its immunities are, because you're only penciled in on the evil chaotic things. Does that make sense? Anyway, yeah. Okay, I think it's time to go back to the Google document and just work through and try to get a few more of those titles done. And I will make a note that I'm up to here. And we'll see if people think that I need to tie a DC check in. I don't know that it is necessary, because I feel like it's very sort of niche. It's very specific. Yeah. That's sort of my thoughts anyway. Okay, so this is what we have so far. Going down. We're back into... So this is the feature that may need adjustment. I'm actually surprised that there hasn't been more resistance to the supernatural defenses thing. I actually think that it's not a bad way to go, but anyway. I have been reminded many times that spellcasters are still the strongest class in... particularly at high level, but still the strongest classes is the priest and the wizard. And I would say the priest is the stronger, even though the wizard does damage more than the priest does. The fact that the priest can deal with healing and so forth makes it hugely valuable. I still think it is the stronger of the classes. Okay, so Stalker, Hunter, Interloper, Sneaker, Prowler. Let's put down Tracker. What's another name for Tracker? Flatfoot, Investigator. Sleuthhound. Sleuth keeps coming up. Bloodhound. Agent. Tracker. Cop. Dick. Tail. Yeah, he's got too many means. Sleuth. Detective. Tracker. Tracer. Tracer. Very similar to Tracker. But Tracer is not a name, something that we could just sort of... I feel like that's potentially got some worth. Skinner, Tracker, Tracer. It's too similar to put it into all in neutral. Stalker could go across. Skinner. Let's do this. I think what we'll do is we'll go here and we'll cut the Skinner, put it down one, take the Stalker, Tracker, Stalker, cut the Stalker, paste that there, Seeker, we're going to put Hunter, Huntress, cut that, put that down one, and we'll put here Tracer. I don't know. I spend way too much time on the titles in these class builds. Every single time I wind up spending more time on these than anything else, and I probably shouldn't. Agent, Hunter, Bounty Hunter. Bounty Hunter is... Hunter and Bounty Hunter. Do I want to do that? No, not necessarily. Pursuer, Tracer, Tracker, Detective. It's not quite right. Operative. No. Detector, Monitor, Locator. Detector might be, it's not. Sleuth. Stalker, Sleuth, Skinner, Sleuth, Skinner, Sleuth, Stalker, Sleuth. We could probably go with Sleuth. Let's go here. Let's go cut, go Skinner, and I'll take Sleuth. And I'll put it here. Sleuth. And then when it comes to chaotic, we want something that's really a bit more aggressive. So let's go with, what's another name for butcher? Because I feel like that's really what that's all about. Butcher. Whoopsies. Let's try again. Butcher. Slaughterman. Flesher. Murderer. Killer. Killer's an easy one. Destroyer. Terminator. I think Terminator is probably the way to go, right? Terminator is Slaughterer, Executioner. I feel like Slaughterer is going down. Cut. You're a Slaughterer. Executioner. Terminator. Predator. Okay, all right, so we've got that, and that. I am going to leave the supernatural defenses as advantage. I could change it and make it affect your body and mind and just you get a +1, but advantage is a nice simple way of doing it. We could just make it their mind. Supernatural defenses might be that you can just protect your mind but not your body. I feel like they would probably do with both. So let's just leave it for now, because this is really just the first draft. Like, this stuff can change. It doesn't need to stay the same. You've got a very, very limited spell list and very, very particular for very, very specific purpose. So this is very niche as a class. But I think that will do fine. For those of you who are wondering what changes I made to the Swashbuckler, you will have to go to the paid Patreon page, buddies, because that's where I stuck it. If you've had a look at the Patreon page for the paid tier, you'll know what I did. I'm not convinced it's the right decision, but it is the decision that I made ultimately with the Swashbuckler. Just because I did a whole lot of research on the Swashbuckler. Just as I've done a bunch of research on the Monster Slayer, trying to figure out sort of where it should fit, because getting the narrative and the mechanics right is actually quite difficult sometimes. All right, no feedback. Okay, seems like everybody's pretty happy with what I've done. And that's 50 minutes, less than 50 minutes. Let's end this poll. Oops, let's end the poll. And I will get out of here. What does that mean for next week? Well, next week, since I'm trying desperately to get this all done, at least in first draft, so that Wally DM's Ancestries can go together with this, and we can release it before the end of the year. That is sort of the intention. I have a couple of other choices here that I can select. So, does Shadowdark RPG need a Monster Slayer class? Just watching, 37%. So nobody particularly really that interested about whether making a decision about it. Just watching. No, 25%. Undecided, 25%. And yes, 12%. So there's not a huge call for it. It's going to be interesting to see how many people actually watch the replays of this. So I've got notes for the Gloomstalker, which I could do. So the Gloomstalker is one that I could sort of put together next week. That might be an option. That would wind up being a Gish. It would be a fighter spellcaster with very specific spells. very much like the Monster Slayer in many respects, actually. And I've built it sort of based off that. So that might be an option. And I think part of the reason why Supernatural Defenses for the Monster Slayer is built the way it is to make sure that it was different enough to the Gloomstalker that I had class that I based off the subclass for 5e. We could also do the War Mage. I know a lot of people are not fond of the idea of a mage that casts spells, but I did build one. You don't get a lot of spells and you don't get a lot of armor class, but it is a thing. So I did sort of put together some notes on that. And we've already done the Swashbuckler. That was last week. I've already done the Hexblade. I've already done the Battlemaster. I've already done the Elemental Warrior. I've done the Arcane Archer. We've got a Blade Singer, which is another Gish. It's a spellcaster that spellcasts from their blade, from their sword, basically. Doesn't cast a lot of spells, not a lot of armor, a little bit different, I guess. I guess the Blade Singer is definitely something my players have requested. So we could do that. The Soul Knife, I did some notes on the Soul Knife. I am not a huge fan of the Soul Knife, so trying to figure that out was actually pretty difficult. And I still have not figured out how to do a Rune Knight, so that's only partly done. So those are sort of the things that could potentially wind up being next week. And maybe you can sway me in the chat or in the comments about where I go with this next week. I don't know. You tell me. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that all works out. So I'm hoping that this shows you that you could potentially make your own classes for Shadowdark. If you can't find exactly the thing that you want to incorporate into your game when you're playing your Shadowdark games and you're running it, and your players have got a particular thing they want to do, you can probably build it yourself. And I always go back to the 4 core classes. If I've built something that's better than the 4 core classes, I've gone too far. And you won't know until you play test it. On paper, it sometimes looks better than it really is. And then, you know, if you've made it better than the wizard and the priest, or even on par with the wizard or priest, because the wizard and priest are so powerful at higher levels, you've probably gone too far as well. It's one of the sticky factors I'm having with one individual in my home group who's getting quite pissed off, actually, because I refuse to make a class in Shadowdark that is more powerful or on par with a wizard or priest. If I could pare back the wizard and priest, I would. But I'm not sure how to do that because they cast magic spells. It's never really been figured out very well. I don't think anybody has ever figured that out properly. So I think the solution is not to build your classes based off them. It is to build them based off something between them and the fighter and the thief in terms of their usefulness outside of combat and inside of combat, because Shadowdark is not just a combat simulator. In fact, it's definitely not a combat simulator. And really, Dungeons & Dragons is not a combat simulator either. Okay. All right. A lot of talking on my part. It's time to get out of here, eh? Huge thank you to everybody who's been watching. Thank you so much for watching and listening. Anybody who took part in the poll, thank you so much for doing so. I do appreciate it. I want to thank those people in chat, so Fred Huber and Fred Gnomes and Paladin, who jumped in and left a comment. At least I know I'm not completely alone here. So we'll keep doing this. And the great thing is this live stream's less than an hour. We got most of it done. For those of you who are wondering, no, I do not use ChatGPT to make classes. I sit in a chair or a bed watching a movie with some books around me, and I nut it out. Because unfortunately, ChatGPT does not make good classes, ancestries, and frankly does not make good monsters either. And I'm not really that sold on their adventures, but adventures are hard to make, even for a human. So I don't expect AI to be able to do it. So anyway, I want to thank all my patrons, the paid tier patrons. Thank you so much. You will get all the stuff at the end of the week anyway. as I normally do. And of course, we'll be back continuing this process until I get about 10 or 11 classes under my belt. And then we're flipping over to 5e, believe it or not. And I'll be going back and doing some design work for 5e. So that'll be interesting, I'm sure. So wherever you are in the world, whether it be the morning, the afternoon, or the night, please look after yourself, your family, and your friends. Be nice to your neighbours. And hey, till next time, keep rolling those 20s.